Do you not think they've been profiteering over the past year or so? There is no way that some of the things that they've put up by 50, 100% should have been put up by that much.
Well, that's the thing. You can buy something from somewhere else, and that's the whole point of... I want people to make a profit. You know, I don't want government to have to step in because they're making big losses and then they're not paying any tax or so on. So making profits is not a bad thing. I think if you're profiteering and you're taking advantage, I think the way farmers are treated sometimes...
Well, just on that, there's another text question here on this from Will in Crediton, who says, would the panel agree that supermarkets need to be legislated to pay farmers more for their produce and the margin they're able to make capped on raw products like eggs and meat? I'm a sheep farmer and the amount we're getting for produce hasn't increased despite our production costs spiralling. Farms will go bankrupt without help. Now, obviously, Will is speaking in self-interest there, but you look at any product that farmers are producing at the moment, milk, whether it's eggs or anything, they are not being paid a fair price by the supermarkets. Is that something the government should step in on?
Well, I'd encourage all supermarkets to pay a fair price, and again, the free market...
Should they be made to?
It's a fine balance. You know, you don't want to get it to the stage where it affects the consumer and people are paying rocketingly high prices with inflation again because you've artificially inflated that. So I think really if you've got to make sure they are getting a fair price. You have supermarkets who have loss leaders on things like alcohol as well. You don't want it to get to the stage where, of course, you're having milk and eggs and basic things are not available. And we've seen during the pandemic when things disappear off the shelves, you know, it's the first thing people go for.
Well, that's happening now. I mean, if you go into supermarkets, there's often no cucumbers, there's no tomatoes, sometimes there's no bread, and we see people posting pictures, I'm one of them, on Twitter, showing the fact there's just no fresh produce available. What are you doing about that?
What time do you go to the next supermarket?
Well, I have. You know, I once went to 5 supermarkets to find tomatoes and cucumbers. Nothing. Oh, what are you doing about that?
Heinz baked beans, you know, Heinz baked beans. Say the price has shot up at that, and people say, "Oh, this tin has gone up by 50% or whatever." Buy the Tesco value one.
No, but
they don't taste the same.
But if they don't
have baked beans that aren't Heinz.
But I just want to point out that Brexit has helped none of this. It hasn't helped the farmers, hasn't helped the prices in the supermarket.
But I don't think it's hindered as much as, shall we say, some people say it has.
I think it has, and also we need to point out the fact that a lot of the time farmers, it's actually cheaper for them because they can't get the people to help pick the crops to plough what they've got back into the ground. It's cheaper to do that than to harvest it.
It's a real problem.
We're wasting a lot
problem in Streatham, isn't it?
Yeah. And to sound like an environmentalist.
We live in a country where, you know, we have farmers and it's really important that we support British produce, and we can't do that in the economic situation we're in at the moment.
Well, it's actually really good to hear from an inner city MP saying that, because I think sometimes there's this real divide between people who live in big cities and they have no comprehension about what goes on in the rural economy.
Yeah, so, and eating out of season as well, Ian. You know, people wanting things all the way through the year, and you look at the environmental impact of that as well, and talking about growing more things in your community and so on. So there is a real genuine argument there about your local communities and your local environment as well.
No, she without be telling us to eat turnips.
Yeah.
Well, but this is the thing, you know. It's all the
all these people wanting.
I don't think I've ever had a turnip. No. Right. Let's go to Charlotte.
I'm going to ask a provocative question. I know that might surprise you, Ian. What do you think?
I have read your Twitter feed.
How about nationalising supermarkets?
Oh boy.
Belle Ribera added, this is your chance to prove your socialist credentials.
Well, do you know what? I think at the moment we're in a really, really shocking situation where we're seeing people having to rely on food banks, and a lot of the supermarkets themselves are providing food donations. I don't think it's right that they're making this level of profit in the same way that gas companies shouldn't be making this level of profit. There is enough food in this country for everybody. It's just that it's not getting to the right people. So nationalising them, I'm not really sure about that. But nationalising the situation in which we're making sure that everybody gets the food that we need.
You see, that was me thinking you were down the line Corbynista who'd nationalise anything.
No, I wouldn't nationalise everything. Why does everybody think that socialism is about nationalising everything?
Because it traditionally has been.
No. Socialism does point to a situation where we nationalise the things, public utilities. Absolutely.
Surely the provision. I mean, I'm obviously playing devil's advocate, but you could argue that the provision of food. I mean, that is kind of a utility, isn't it?
And people should have a right to food. In fact, my colleague Ian Byrne in Liverpool has actually just sparked a whole movement in terms of a right to food. A right to food should be enshrined in law. But that doesn't necessarily mean...
How on earth do you do that?
There are many different ways around it. I mean, we know, for example, that we grow enough food in this country, and we know that we have the resources to make sure that everybody in this country has what they need in terms of food. And it's the same way as a universal basic income, I would say, making sure that everybody has what they need to eat. That doesn't mean that you can't go to Tesco's and pick up something from Tesco's finest range, let's say, on your own
Such
dime.
a champagne socialist, aren't you?
Tesco's finest, yes, that's the height of champagne socialism.
But Charlotte, I assume you weren't being 100% serious with that suggestion.
I was thinking about food banks, and obviously we've seen enormous growth of them. And in a way, that is the nationalisation of food, isn't it? It's making food freely available to communities, but it's not necessarily provided for by the state.
It's not being run by government. I can't imagine anyone running a food service.
I agree with you. It's not exactly provided by the state. It's provided by communities, or it's provided by charities, third sector. No, I hear you. But imagine if that was, say, provided by the state. So there were places that people could go to that are on welfare benefits and below the poverty line, which I think should be a hell of a lot higher, but there we have it. And they could go to these places and access not just tinned food, which is often what's available at food banks, but fresh produce. So everybody, as Belle said, had access to fresh food, and they didn't need to queue up in undignified ways outside food banks. The children reliant on free school meals when they can access them, but instead everyone had an at least basic standard of food provision. And we all see now in Sainsbury's and Tesco's, they have a big box normally at the entrance or the exit when you're leaving, and you can put in food so that then that's distributed to food banks or people that need it and so forth, and you can access it.
That's the right way to do it then.
Yeah, but also, why is it left to customers to top up the provision of food outside?
You're given the chance.
Sainsbury's or Tesco, for example, could provide food, couldn't they? If they're making profits, why don't they contribute?
And are they paying their fair share of tax? Probably not.
And are they paying a fair share of salary as well to people that work?
Are they paying farmers properly? That's another
question. Yeah, it's a good question.